Hello, my name is Joshua Keith, and this is theburningcoal.com, a website dedicated to God's glory, His grace, and our response to it. So, I wanted us to start taking a look at profiles in faith and noticing different people in the Old and New Testament who have incredible faith and their dedication to God and the glory that they bring to Him because of that. A lot of times in these, there's a lot of lessons we can learn and apply to our lives. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I do have a son. His name is Daniel. He was born in January, and we actually have friends who just had a baby boy, and they named him Daniel. So, with that in mind, it just made sense for us to start off in these profiles of faith, talking about Daniel, and in particularly Daniel and the lion's den. If you remember, Daniel was somebody who was captured by the Babylonians in their first captivity. And he was put into a position of power through faithful service. And in fact, when it comes time to Daniel chapter 6, where we read about Daniel and the lion's den, we see that a new kingdom has come. So when he was first captured, he was in service to the Babylonians, but the Persians come and they conquer the Babylonians. And so now Daniel goes into service of the Medes and Persians. And so Daniel is actually put in a position of power. We notice in Daniel chapter 6, starting in verse 1, it says, "It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom satraps to be throughout the whole kingdom, and over them 3 high officials, of whom Daniel was one, to whom these satraps should give account, so that the king might suffer no loss. Then Daniel became distinguished above all the other high officials and satraps, because an excellent spirit was in him. And the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. Then the high officials and the satraps sought to find a ground for complaint against Daniel with regard to the kingdom, but they could find no ground for complaint or any fault, because he was faithful, and no error or fault was found in him. Then these men said, 'We shall not find any ground for complaint against this Daniel, unless we find it in connection with the law of his God.'" So we see in the story of Daniel, to start with, the first thing that we notice about Daniel is just how good of a person that he is. And we actually see a lot of parallels between Daniel and Joseph in their accounts, and how they are servants, and as servants they are incredibly faithful. Even though they didn't really choose to be servants to their masters, they show a faithfulness that invites trust. And they both get put into these incredibly high positions of these kingdoms that are in charge of the known world at the time. And it goes to show the importance of high character and being able to be trusted. And we see that high character even more in that Daniel was trying to be trapped by these other rulers. They did not like this foreigner being put over them. They did not like the power that he was going to be second to the king. And so they start looking into Daniel's life, and they find nothing to use against him. He wasn't cheating people. He wasn't taking advantage of his position. He was honorable. He was trustworthy. And it's important for us to think about somebody like Daniel and ask that question about ourselves. Is it something where we as Christians, if people were trying to bring us down, if people were trying to trap us and to work against us, what would they find? What pitfalls would we walk into for them to make it easy for them to bring us down? Or would we be like Daniel, and when they were trying to trap us, the only thing they could do to trap us is to use our connection to God? Daniel was so faithful to God that they understood that the only way that they could bring him down was to make being faithful to God unlawful. And again, that's important, because that means that he was law-abiding. Again, he's a captive in a foreign land. Yet he follows the laws so well that they have nothing they can do except to change the law to go against God. Because the only thing he's willing to submit to more than the law is God. And so that's what they use against him. Again, as Christians, would people know that our relationship with God is something that they could use to trap us? That God, serving God is something we will do no matter what. And so if they want to bring us down, then they need to pit other people against us and God, because we will always follow God no matter the personal cost. And so in verse 6, that's what they wind up doing, is they go and talk with Darius, and they make this plan to set Daniel up by saying, you can't praise or petition or pray to any god or man except for the king. Well, they knew this would work because in verse 10 it says, when Daniel knew that the document had been signed, he went to his house where he had windows in his upper chamber open towards Jerusalem. He got down on his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God as he had done previously. Again, notice that his prayer life is so consistent that they know that praying is the way to catch him. They work with Darius to make it a law to where he can't pray to any other god, or he will be cast to the lions. He will get that punishment. And here we see a couple of things. Again, going back to this idea of our faith being known. Do people understand us that we are a praying people, that we are connected to God? Do they see that in our everyday life? It's not that this was something that they just hoped Daniel would have a problem with, but his character was such, his life was such that they knew that it would work. And on top of that, we see that Daniel doesn't abandon his prayer in this time of trial. Now, of course, there's a very obvious and specific application here that we need to serve God no matter what. And again, there is nothing that we should put before God. We should not put the law of the land before God. We should not put family before God. We should not put man before God, other people. Even our spouses do not come before God. Our children do not come before God. Our relationship with God has to be paramount above everything. And so Daniel shows that to us very clearly in his own devotion. And it's something we should look to emulate in our lives. But I also want to point out that sometimes we can get distracted, not because there was a law against something, but because of the stress or the challenges that we're facing. You can imagine that Daniel understands that these people are plotting against him, and this is not going to be the first thing that they've done to try to plot against him. He's probably heard about it, he knows, and then he comes and there's this law, and it puts him in direct contradiction to the king. Even putting aside the temptation to just maybe do it in his closet, so that way people don't know that he's doing it. There are times in our lives where we as Christians are walking in our daily lives, and we come into trials, we come into temptations, we come into hard times, stumbling blocks, and we have a tendency to run away from God. That we allow that stress to pull us into the things of the world. To instead of turning to God's Word, to turning to songs, to turning to prayer, to focus on God in our time of trial, we instead try to turn towards physical things, to the things of the world in those difficult and stressful times. But Daniel goes to his pattern, to his routine. And of course, part of this is, again, Daniel has been doing this forever. He's going to do it because it's the right thing to do. But I also think Daniel does it because he knows that he needs the strength that comes from praying. That he needs to call upon his God and say, Lord, please protect me from my enemies. And that's exactly what Daniel does. He does not hide from that prayer that's going to strengthen him. It's no accident that when Jesus is coming into temptation in the Garden of Gethsemane, when he's about to go on the cross, that he talks about praying. And he goes and he prays himself, but he also tells the disciples to pray. He says, pray, for the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. When we're dealing with hard times and difficulties, our first response, whether or not it's been outlawed like it was in Daniel's case, our first response should always be to go to God in prayer, to get that strength from him, so that way we can build our lives and our relationship with him and be ready for whatever trial that comes before us. And so the first thing that we see is that we want to have a life that is spotless before God, but also before man, so that if they were to try to trap us, the only thing that they could find is to pit something else between us and God. And that's the only way that they're going to bring us down. But also we see the importance of prayer. One, in order to do what is right no matter what has been decreed, how it affects other people. We're gonna pray, we're gonna build that relationship with God no matter what. But in particularly in times of trial, to keep that relationship with God strong and vibrant, and to lean on it as a source of support and strength, so that way we are ready to serve him no matter what happens. So when Daniel goes and does this, we see that the king commands in verse 16, and Daniel was brought and cast into the den of lions. The king declared to Daniel, may your God whom you serve continually deliver you. And a stone was brought and laid on the mouth of the den, and the king sealed with it his own signet, and with the signet of his lords, that nothing might be changed concerning Daniel. Then the king went to his palace and spent the night fasting. No diversions were brought to him, and sleep fled from him. And so Daniel prays to God, and it is not renewed. It is not made to where Darius changes his mind because he realized he was trapped. He still has to go through this temptation, and he still has to go through this trial. And so he is put into that lion's den. But then at verse 19, we see what happens. It says, then at the break of day, the king arose and went in a haste to the den of lions. As he came near to the den where Daniel was, he cried out in a tone of anguish. The king declared to Daniel, O Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God whom you serve continually been able to deliver you from the lions? Then Daniel said to the king, O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, and they have not harmed me, because I was found blameless before him. And also before you, O king, I have done no harm. Then the king was exceedingly glad and commanded that Daniel be taken up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no kind of harm was found on him, because he had trusted in his God. And so we see here that Daniel is indeed rescued from the lions, that an angel came and shut the mouths of the lions. And even though that Daniel was there, and the lions, as we see, were hungry because they wind up eating the families of those who tried to trap Daniel, we see that Daniel was kept safe, that no harm came to him. And it talked about him, no harm coming to him, because he had trusted in his God. One of the things that we're going to talk about quite a bit in these profiles of faith is that a lot of times when we look at these stories, particularly in the Old Testament, but even in the miracles of Jesus and different people, that we see physical representations of a spiritual reality. The point of the story of Daniel in the lion's den is not to show that God is going to keep people from ever dying as long as they are faithful to him. That's not the point at all. Daniel's not with us now. Daniel does eventually die. But the point is that God is there to protect him. That God protects him in these time of trials, that he rewards his faithfulness. And the spiritual reality that's being conveyed behind this physical example is that God is delivering us from judgment here. He is delivering us from death and decay. Not in the world today, but in the heavenly realms. That we are being stored for not now, but for eternity. And so it's not just that the faithfulness that we have with God means that we are never going to die physically, that no matter what happens, God is going to shut the mouths of the lions. That's not the case at all. And in fact, in Daniel chapter 3, we see this same message from Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. It says, they say there in verse 16 of Daniel 3, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If this be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up." And so we see here Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they are going to be rescued from judgment as well. But their obedience is not conditional upon that. And really, they have been sent as these messengers, and this book was written because of prophecies that are going to come to pass, where the Jews who follow after, before Christ, but after the captivity, they're going to go through a lot of trials and tribulations. They're going to be persecuted. And not all of them are going to be saved. We see the same thing happen in the church. There were Christians who were killed because of their faith. James the Apostle, we see that in the book of Acts. So what do we take from that? Does that mean that they really weren't that faithful and God wasn't with them? No. The point of all of this is that God is looking out for his people. And he is delivering them not from physical pain, not from physical death, but from spiritual death. And really, the battle that we're paying attention to is what Peter warns us about in 1 Peter 5:7. It says, "Be sober-minded, be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour." We are in the lion's den right now. Satan is after us right now. He is looking to devour us. Now, if you go to God, the devil will flee from you. Why? Because God is stronger than the devil. God is able to shut the mouth of that roaring lion and keep it from devouring you. And that's what the lesson that we should get from Daniel and the lion's den is, that God can save us from spiritual destruction. He can save our souls. He can hold us so that we can be successful in all of our trials and tribulations, so that we then can enjoy our eternal home in heaven with him. And so it's not about when Daniel is saved from the lion's den. That doesn't mean that he never died. He does. He's not walking the earth today preaching to us. But it's about the fact that God is protecting his people. And in particular, he's protecting them for his spiritual home. And so that's what we want to remember from Daniel as well. So again, the three things that we talked about is, one, we want to be people of high character. People that the only way that people will find fault with us is because we are too faithful to God. And in that faithfulness, when it comes to time of trials and tribulation, the first thing we should do is go to God to prayer. Whether it's been outlawed, whether or not we're being discouraged by others because of the tribulations that we're facing, it doesn't matter. We go to God in prayer, and we get strength from him for the trials that we are in and the trials we will be facing tomorrow. And we remember that God is protecting us through all of these trials, that he is shutting the mouth of the lion that is seeking to devour us. We are able to have that because of what Jesus has done for us and the salvation that has been offered on our behalf. And so we're able to take a look at Daniel, and there's a lot of things that we can apply to our lives. I hope that this has been beneficial to you, and that the Lord blesses you in the work of his kingdom.